And then up first, Jonathan Spark, Steve Johnson, and joining us very shortly, Art Evans and Stephen Jeffries. And so Stephen will be joining us in a few minutes. He's getting out of his makeup right now. How many of you took part in that really incredible photo op just a few minutes ago? How awesome was that? Very, very cool. Well, let's go actually begin with Stephen. Steve. Oh, okay. Well, Steve Johnson. Yeah, Steve Johnson, yeah. Well, we'll get to a minute. Well, all right, well, thank you again for joining us here this weekend. This year marking, of course, the 30th anniversary of Fright Night. I guess let's go ahead and begin with how you all became involved with the production.
I got hired. I just went through the regular audition process, so I was submitted for the part and came in to meet Jackie Birch, who was the casting director. Absolutely wonderful woman, very encouraging, very supportive, and which helps you give the best of what you got to bring. And I think, I met at a couple of callbacks. I don't think it was a really particularly lengthy process for me. And then I got the call.
I was living in San Francisco. I was working at an oyster bar, and I had done a couple of things. I just got into acting school, and I had met Jackie through another project, the casting woman, and was going down to Los Angeles for another thing, and called her and asked if she wanted to get together, and she said no, but she did have a project that she would like to see me for, and this, so I came down and went for a Fright Night, and it seemed to go well, and they called me. I had like 4 callbacks or so, and so I go down for a couple of weeks for a few months, and then we got it.
That's essentially nothing more than change.
Yeah.
No, that was over 5
hours, yeah. I built it before.
I was Bill Ragsdale's lover, and he got me the part. I was doing the groundlings in LA. Probably that Farrell. That's the way all the people came from there. And Jackie Birch saw me and asked me for an audition. I auditioned really early, and I had to wait like 3 or 4 months to get it. If you know what it's like waiting for a job of your lifetime and thinking, oh, nobody's going to call. So I would keep calling Jackie. And, no, Tom still likes you. Tom still likes you. So it was just an audition process.
For me, I knew Jackie for a couple of projects, Martin Luther King film, Red Belly, and some other films, TV shows. I can't exactly remember which ones in that area, that time area. And I remember she said, I went out for this part in this film, and it was crowded. Almost like half of the people that are over here love telling the story. It was jam-packed with a lot of actors, and we were 3 hours waiting to audition. 3 hours. Now, when you wait that long, they got to pay you, So I had another audition to make, which I didn't think I was going to make it, So I called my agent and said, I got to leave. She says, okay, all right, just go ahead and leave. So I started packing up my stuff, resume and my attaché case, So I'm leaving, walking out the door. The guy that I was talking to, hanging with, a friend of mine, he said, all right, where you going? I said, I'm out of here, man. He says, you sure you want to leave? I said, yeah, I got another appointment. You really sure you want to leave? It's 3 hours. Nobody's being seen. they are 3 hours late. He said, how many black guys you see here? So I crossed my legs. I sit down, crossed my legs, got a glass of water. I will be here until this time tomorrow. That's how I got the job.
This is your birthday weekend.
Oh, yeah. The 73rd birthday.
So, Tom's story really has a...
You didn't hear my story.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Actually, contrary to popular opinion, I wasn't in the movie. That's a facsimile of me. It's a doppelganger. The guy's name is Roger. What was his last name?
Bob Head.
Bob Head. Right. Now they sent me the script. I read it. I loved it. I went out and met with Tom in LA, and that was it. Yeah, sure.
Okay, romance too though, because he had that storyboard and all that stuff. He went through the entire movie.
He just literally, on the day that he and I met, he sat down and he literally described the movie from the first shot through all the shots of the movie to the end of the movie.
Did he really? Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
He did that?
Described the entire thing, and I thought, geez, I want to work with this guy. He knows what he's doing. And because Tom was an experienced screenwriter, but he'd never directed a movie before.
Yeah, that was great.
Which leads me into my next question is, can you talk a little bit about him being a first-time director and how you expanded a little bit upon it right now with your first meeting with him, but can you talk a little bit about how his background as a screenwriter helped him to bring his vision of what he wanted to life on the screen?
Well, I think, and it's happening much more now. It didn't happen a lot in those days. When I say in those days, I'm talking 1914.
Previous century.
We
We started in 1914.
Right.
Show.
Screenwriters were not often directors of their own movies. So this was a very sort of new experience. And I think he probably did the same thing with the producers in the studio that he did with me, which was he sat down and he said, this is what I'm going to shoot. And it was very clear from the very beginning that he knew what he was doing. But also, Tom had been an actor when he was young. And so he was really comfortable speaking in the actor's vocabulary. I mean, we sat down the very first day and we talked about the characters. We all did biographies of our
Well,
characters.
not all of us, but
Oh, okay.
there were a couple of people we missed.
You're still in the room. You're still in the audition room.
Right, we were waiting.
Right, I
for
was
the-
still in the audition.
And you actually had the rare opportunity of actually being able to rehearse before you actually shot,
Right.
which is something that was kind of unheard of as well.
Exactly.
And Tom was a very passionate director too. You know, it wasn't like someone saying, okay, so you walk through the door, you come in, and it's like, this is where you've been, and this thing is behind you, and you're coming in here. So, by the time you're ready to get on you're actually shooting, you're already in the scene.
I like his emotional involvement.
Yeah.
Well, and you need that because sometimes you're acting against comfort. When you're acting against
I know
something.
what you're talking about.
Some of us brought more to the table than others. But also, Tom is a huge fan of the genre, and that was in every word on every page. He respected and adored the old vampire movies and the elements, the folklore that was so rich in the vampire lore, and he brought that to the movie, and I think that's part of the lasting effect of the spread of the story that people keep coming back to or discovering for the first time. There's a real genuineness to it.
Yeah, but at the same time, he was smart enough to know that because the genre had been made fun of more recently, that is up until the time we made Fright Night, with movies like Love at First Bite and a couple of other movies where literally it was, they were taking the piss out of the genre. And Tom believed in it so passionately that he realized, I think, I know him, that he had to twist it a little bit here and there to kind of enliven it and reinvigorate it. So it all came from love. The whole idea that Jerry's line to Peter, you have to believe in order for that to work. Instead of the cross just being the thing that repels, you have to believe in the idea behind the cross in order for it to work. And I think that really sort of invigorated the idea behind the movie. But it was never done, even though there's a lot of humor in the movie, we never set out to make fun of the genre. The humor was incidental to the situation and the characters.
I think also that I can remember specifically before each shot, you know, we'd all be standing around, a lot of times standing around before the shot, and I'd always be laughing so hard. Chris is really funny, Billy, but but we had fun. We would always be laughing, Tom, like, come on you guys, come on, we gotta have a shot now, quit laughing. You know, so, but I think it shows in the film too, that we had so much fun doing it, that it just comes through. Even though we're not joking around, the fun just comes through.
And I'm going to interject here really quick. If you'll please give a big Mad Monster welcome to Stephen Jeffries and Steve Johnson. I'm going to jump back for a second here and get Stephen's story on how he first joined Fright Night as well, too. Coach Stephen.
Well, I was, Amanda might have mentioned this, but we were working on a movie together in Palm Springs called Fraternity Vacation, and what happened? And so then, and I had met the casting director in New York, actually by mistake, and a few months later she was casting Fright Night, and she had remembered me from that erroneous casting call, and my name popped up into her, so yeah, I got the part, and next.
Well, you were excited. You were going to play Charlie, right? You were going to prepare. Hey, it's me. You were like up for playing the role of Charlie, right? Or...
Yeah, I mean, I had studied acting for a while, and I kind of thought that I was more of a sort of straight down the middle type character, but apparently people thought otherwise of me, so I started getting these really strange parts, and I thought I was going to be Charlie Brewster, but my agent said, no, you're the little sidekick friend, and seriously, I didn't put it together. Usually when you read a script, you sort of connect with the character, and I've been playing like really young parts, and then I get this kind of strange Jack Nicholson Shining type character thrown at me. But it all worked out. I mean, between the great cast and Tom Holland, and it was. It's weird. I mean, sometimes things turn out to be so much more different and better than you imagine, and that definitely was the case with this.
Now, can you also tell us how it was being once again in Steve's incredible makeup as Evil Ed? Just now for the photo op.
Well, when I left the chair 30 years ago, I mean, I vowed that I would never ever. I mean, seriously, I was. It took months of recovery to get up. But when you look at it on screen, I'm just so grateful for having done it, and it's it looks amazing. But going through it, I'm not gonna lie, it ain't fun. But Steve's he's so talented and he's so passionate about what he does that you know, you feel that, you know, I mean, he really loves what he does, and so, you know, that makes it slightly more bearable.
Now, Steve, can you talk a little bit about bringing Steven once again to life as E-Boy?
Oh, you mean today?
The process and everything.
It was strangely, it's all at the team time. I mean, once, 30 years later, once 18 guys ago, and of course, the wit, there he is. So, what I'm waiting for is the 60th anniversary. Steven Walker and bringing the same contact.
When we all really look like those the people with the makeup on. You don't have to put the makeup on.
I mean, the funny thing about it actually today is that I look down at the cabinet and set up what we're doing, and every single material, from contact lenses to the tape to the paints, to every way of applying it is different. It's completely new animal. So that's it.
Did you guys do like a new mold or anything?
No, we just remolded his teeth.
You did a new teeth thing.
Yeah.
But the hard part is you have to stay there all those hours.
Oh, there's
putting it on, and then you have to stand around for hours.
Yes, you
Yeah,
know. Waiting for you guys.
You have to have a lot of patience, you know.
Hey, tell them about the wolf makeup for the
Yeah, I mean, everybody up here I tortured on that film. Usually, let's not even talk about the contact lenses, but Steven
Let's talk about
Steven got it the worst. I was just reminiscing that toward the end of the transformation sequence, Steven has an animatronic head and an extended neck.
where he becomes Wolfman after he goes and he's
Right, very transformed. And that makeup was a full body makeup with a bunch of mechanical aspects. And it took 18 hours. It took a team of 4 of us working 18 hours to do that. And I think that might be a record. And there's also, at the risk of saying something in bad taste, which I don't care about anyway, is one of the guys that was supposed to show up to help with that makeup did not show up. And this is probably one of the reasons it took so much longer, because we were missing a pair of hands. And I kept calling him and calling him. He's one of my better friends. And he finally shows up like 2 days later, and he's been on a coke binge. And so I'm like, we
the
have.
80s.
I mean, it wasn't, but we showed up to work at least. And so I took him aside and I said, look, this is ridiculous, you fucked us. And so he went home and blew his head off. He literally killed himself. And I blamed Steven for it. If it weren't for having me do that ridiculous makeup, he would probably still be with us.
I heard that story.
Now, man.
Now, what is it about the makeup world that, for instance, my story is much less onerous and difficult than Steven's was, but I had a period of 2 weeks where I was coming in at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I would go to work at noon after the makeup. But when I would arrive at 4 a.m., Kenny Diaz, who was the guy who was actually doing the actual applications, it was in a trailer, and he would be sleeping up in the cubby at the top of the trailer. He had been up, who knows how late all night, studying forensic medicine, his catalog of automobile accidents. And he would, injuries. And I would arrive in the morning, and I look around and go, and suddenly I hear,
Good morning! How you doing, dude? Let's go.
and then he'd grab a bottle of rum.
Are you kidding?
No, I'm serious. He'd grab a bottle of rum and pour literally a glass that high of rum and say, all right, let's get to work.
That was probably to come down from the coke. Now I find this out 30 years later. Jesus Christ. Well, the thing about doing this kind of makeup is you're always trying to up yourself in the 80s and early 80s. That was I hated this kind of stuff. So, I didn't give a flying fuck about any of your guys' coming. I just wanted to show what was apparent.
Evidently.
Show what was possible, but we're not going to talk about the content.
So Steve,
Oh, let's.
Because in those days, the contact lenses, at least the ones that were colored and had, sort of effect on them, were literally pieces of glass, right?
That's correct.
That had been painted. So you could only wear them for, I think I wore mine for more like 20, 25 minutes at a time.
Exactly.
Because I couldn't wear them any longer. I mean, I was literally screaming in pain.
Yeah. Well, listen, a lot of people have given me a hard time, my peers, when they find out how I created those lenses. Rick Baker taught me on American Werewolf in London to make the contact lenses. He painted them himself, and he made them as bright as possible. The eyes have to read after pop after pop. So try to kick his ass, instead of using acrylic paints, Fright Night, I not only used fluorescent paints, but then I went in with iridescent powders and glitter, if you recall. So I put glitter in these poor guys' eyes, basically.
And I'm this little pitcher trying to be the team player, and I think this was my last set. And by that time, your eyes get weary of having them put in and out. And I had 3 different sets of lenses, and they put them in, and it just felt so different and so horrible. And you know, we put them in, we're trying to get ready for the shot, but it's just awful. And I don't want to say anything, and then finally I just, you know, kind of raised my hand, and I said, they've got to come out, there's something going on. And this particular pair wasn't sanded. So.
The glitter was laminated in there, to a degree.
I remember there was a guy.
You all still have your eyesight?
There was a doctor named Greenspan that was putting them in Greenspan. I hated him because they hurt so much, and I blamed him. But they originally, when the scene where I die, go down the stairs, and I start walking back up like this, they had 2 big contacts in. I couldn't see, there was nothing, so I'd start to go up the stairs and I'd trip. And they go, let's go back down, try it. I start, and I trip. Finally, after about 5 times and lots of bruises, I took 1 out. So there's really only one you see this kind of cockeyed, but the other one is supposed to be all messed up.
I can relate to the contact lens.
Let Art Evans makeup took a long time.
Well, yeah, you know, to find the chapstick, you know, that was about it. But I can relate, when I found out what he had to go through, what they had to go through for makeup, sitting in that chair for, and a piece at a time, then they'd photograph another piece, then they'd photograph it, and then sit there all that time. I did a thing with Eddie Murphy, Metro, they had to put a thing on me because I was supposed to get my throat slashed, and they put this stuff on, and you have to sit there while it dries. And when it dries, I don't know if you guys found this or not, that it'll burn. And so I got actually a degree of burn, you know, on me from whatever they use for the makeup. And so these guys,
We changed the subject. You want to string me up?
these guys sit there for hours. And he's still wearing some of it, aren't you?
No, but I mean, it was state of the art at the time, and with CGI now, you just don't see it anymore. And yeah, it was on the cutting edge, and there was a little bit of suffering. But it's amazing, and it's one of the things I think that kicked Fright Night up another notch in terms of the films, the horror films in that genre at the time, because it really was effective. Some of it, you know, Tom was very judicious about how long he would stay on a shot. One in particular is the one with my great big mouth, because it's so strange. It was sort of a last minute, right? Speak to that a little bit, because that was a story you told on another piano at school.
Oh, yeah, I didn't speak with Tom Holland for years after that. I was so angry with him because he came up with this idea like overnight of that huge shark mouth. And so I said, look, it's not going to move. It's just going to be like this immovable mask. It's not going to face. And he goes, it's okay, it's going to be a quick shot. And we got to set. It looked good. We responded to it. And it ends up being in the movie for a long time. And I just thought I was going to be laughing so for it. It ended up on the poster. So it worked out pretty well.
But you can't hold on a shot like that till there's just a fine line before it just looks comical, clownish, and it was a climactic, one of the climactic moments in the film in terms of the horror. But it was very effective.
Bill, we were doing the scene, and Bill pushes the stake into my heart up at the top of the stairs. And just as he did that, well, they have to strap this thing on you, so you got this big stake. Just as he did that, got that shot, it's like, lunch! So you gonna take this off? Or, no, we can't take it off. We'll take it on, put it back on. So I have to go to the commissary with this? So, you know, try and hold your tray with a big steak coming out.
Now, this is for William, Amanda, and Steven. So you guys have a really good chemistry on screen, and I'm just curious as to how much, if any, you hung out in between
Acting.
takes.
I'm sorry, but I hung out with thugs and everything, because I wanted to hang out with. These people were scary to me.
Yeah, we hung out a little bit. Stephen and I went to dinner a couple of times, and met up in New York, and we socialized a little. Amanda was very plugged in to the Hollywood elite, and so we would go to parties and stuff. And she knew some of these bigwig people, and so we went to a party.
She had those 2 miniature schnauzers she always thinks.
Yeah, the fur coat she wore. Amanda introduced me.
Pose as her driver, I'd drive her.
I'm not sure what he said. I was driving a
You were a driver? Is that what you just said?
I was in
Come on, there's
disguise.
This has gone way off track. But actually, Stephen did mention that he and I did this incredible film together, incredible piece of work. Fraternity vacation. And we were boyfriend and girlfriend. And he was the lead in that one. Anyway. And one time we're just hanging out and, just chatting and waiting for things to get set up for work. And it's kind of like, where do you go after this? What are you doing after this? And I'm doing this little movie called FRIGHT NIGHT. And I'm like, me too. That was so weird. It was just completely coincidental.
You guys are like Hepburn and Tracy.
Also, we spend a lot of time, as you do on movie sets, you spend a lot of time hanging around waiting for shots, for setups, what have you. And I don't think we went to our dressing rooms a lot. We spent a lot of time hanging out and talking and laughing and listening to stories, Roddy stories. Roddy stories were just extraordinary. Just old Hollywood stories. So we spent a lot of time socializing and really we got to know each other really well on the set.
And so can you all sort of speak a little bit about working with Ronnie? In particular, Chris and also William and Steve.
My experience was what you would imagine it would be. I grew up watching Roddy on TV and in movies, and found myself on the set with him one day, and it was wonderful. And he had a lot of stories, and he was happy to tell them, and he knew a lot of where the bodies were buried in Hollywood, and told some of those stories as well. And to hear someone talk about their friend Elizabeth Taylor or Laurel and Hardy and stuff like that, you're just kind of like, it's a wonderful experience. And he was very generous and enjoyed the lore and the history of it. So, yeah.
And Roddy was always, as he was with anyone that he knew and had worked with over his lifetime, a great friend. In the sense that my wife worked with him in a play. She was on tour with him, that's many years ago. And she would always get a birthday card from him. From that time forward, wherever he was in the world, if he was in Hungary shooting a movie, on the day of her birthday, she got a card. That was the kind of guy.
It was lovely that he was friends with everybody, but he had a certain type of career, and he was very humble about that. And so here he is, and I remember him talking about this, written into a part. The part as written is this sort of B actor who is now a late night, talk show. That's what his career has come to. And he was so modest that he was like, well, I kind of understand this person, because he wasn't necessarily an A-list actor. He was friends with those lists, but he saw himself very authentically in the character of Peter Vincent. And I think that was so rich, and that's part of what made his performance so rich, because it had real authenticity to it.
This individual, this artist, this iconic artist, I saw him in a film where he was riding a horse with Elizabeth Taylor or whatever, and it was in Natalie Wood. I mean, so here we are at a table pretty much like we are right now, all of us, and Roddy McDowell. I remember that, Roddy McDowell, to my right, I remember. And Tom asked us to make a bio regarding our characters. And I'm from theater, that's where I started. So that's right up my alley, I love that, and making, about your character. And so we all looked at each other, we all accepted that with a lot of enthusiasm. And I said, Roddy McDowell. I don't figure he's going to meet Roddy McDowell. I mean, I'm going to do it because I love this. But Roddy, he's a superstar. He's the iconic star. The next day we came to work. Not only did he have his bio, but it went on for what, 5 pages? You guys remember when he sat there?
I remember you saying that, yeah.
He went on. And I'm saying, here's a guy, he's the star of the movie, he's an iconic star. If he could, and I was so happy, I had my little page and a half. I extended that little page and a half. I stretched it into 3 pages because I was so encouraged by the fact that he had that kind of respect for our artists.
I worked with Roddy just a little bit. I didn't, I'd always be like, Billy says, yeah, I'm going to his house for a dinner party. Oh, well, I'm going to eat egg salad out of my car. but I have to say, as impressed as I was with Roddy, it was Chris who I couldn't believe I was working, because I had seen Dog Day Afternoon. And really one of the most convincing performances I've ever seen on film. It was brilliant, and I was just so intimidated. I thought, oh, this guy's got to be a jerk. It turned out I was right. I mean, I couldn't believe how nice he was and what a good person he was to have on the set. Just really gave everything, just like Roddy did. I was my first acting job. I was so fortunate.
Well, and I have to agree that this is someone who had a resume just miles long, even at that time. And yet we were treated as peers. And I spent a lot of time working with Chris in the film. And he was so gracious. And you used the word generous about Roddy, and it was the same with Chris. And there were some real vulnerable moments for me, when I'm straddling his lap and there's tubes coming down my head to put blood on my back. And he was just a constant gentleman, and yet really met us on the playing field in a level position. And you just don't, it just doesn't happen like that, and it doesn't get any better than that.
You have no idea the effort it took.
You think this funny, you should have been there when they were shooting this.
I have to agree with what everyone has said. I came onto the set feeling really nervous, working with such respected actors, and they just led by example and made everyone feel so comfortable. And that definitely wasn't the case with some of the other projects that I worked on. So yeah, it was really unique in that sense. On this film. I think they just brought the right people together, and it's awesome.
And I think Tom and his energy that you spoke to earlier, that he was so sort of eager and enthusiastic, and it was like we were all invited to this great party, and so let's all just have a good time, and it really felt so communal right away.
I think it's testament too that we all keep in touch. I don't go to these too often, but I go to see these people because I have so much fun with them, and they're like a family, at least to me. Yeah.
You're like a family member.
Okay, they're hard to make,
So,
yeah, I feel like they're family to me.
So Stephen, your take on Evil Ed, you managed to walk this very kind of fine line where it's just the right amount of balance of being crazy but not being too over the top. Especially in the transformation into becoming a werewolf in your showdown with Peter. Can you talk a little bit about the choices you made in bringing that to life on screen? It's undoubtedly a very physical part of the movie for you.
It's funny because I really worked a lot more with Tom on this character than I have with characters in other movies in relation to the director. I mean, he gave me some really good direction, very specific in what he wanted, and like the laugh, for example. I mean, he wanted it a certain way, and it didn't come natural to me, but he he suggested things that I tried, and eventually it worked. And in the I have to say that the part as written is just kind of there on the paper, and I just kind of memorized my lines and talk loud enough to be heard, and he did such a great job with the subtleties of the character in the written word that it really wasn't that tough. He did a lot of the work for me. And I totally trusted him, and did what I was asked.
Now, for Chris and Amanda and William, can you talk a little bit about the nightclub scene? In particular, the difficulties of trying to shoot the classic, sort of iconic image of the vampire not seeing his image in the mirror, and the difficulties in pulling it off.
Well, this is when the movie, not that I didn't love working with Billy, but this is when they got kind of interesting for me as an actor. And this is also why I got the role, as opposed to a real 16 or 17-year-old. Billy's a little younger than I am, still a girl. But I was hired, and I was 26 at the time that I made FRIGHT NIGHT, playing 17, because of the transition that was going to occur with the character Amy throughout the film. So it is that scene where that begins. And again, it was magnificent working with Chris. We were very comfortable with each other and working out that dance sequence. We did have a choreographer, but we just, it just was organic, and it was time for that relationship to shift, because Amy was such an innocent with him, of course enamored from the get-go, but it was degrees of that transformation. So Chris had to step out, of course, for that shot, and I do remember coming in so that I could get levels of height with that, and you just kind of throw yourself and commit yourself to doing something that is particularly weird, but you just have to go as if, and that's what actors do. You're trying to live under imaginary circumstances, and that's one of those moments.
And Tom's choices, I think, here are instructive as to his approach to the movie. We talked about his love of the conventions of the vampire genre, and earlier in the movie, there's the scene where they're all congregating in Jerry's foyer, or wherever it is, and Ronnie's holding the mirror, and he sees that Jerry doesn't have a reflection in the mirror, and he drops the mirror, and then smash mirrors on the floor. That's all sort of great. But then he extends the metaphor later in the scene in the nightclub, in a dance scene that's much more contemporary. That's about, it's very 80s, but it's for the time that was what was going on. People were going to dance clubs, they were getting high, they were getting crazy, they were dancing. And to inject that into that genre convention, into that locale, into that location, I thought was really interesting. It's also interesting to me that almost all the women who come up to me, who have seen the movie and are big fans of the movie, that's the scene they remember the most.
That was the seduction. That's where it began. And then my hair got good.
You lost your bow? Is that
Lost the bow.
Is that where you lost the bow?
Got a little updo. Got a little more makeup. Got a little more makeup. Got a little pretty.
A little piece
You also
of...
did breast augmentation.
Yes.
Hey.
I don't think anybody in the audience knew that.
Well, everybody was doing breast augmentation.
They still are.
I did breast augmentation.
Honestly, up to from, is this a little bit like something about Mary kind of thing, or what?
Here's the line, here's you.
Groundlings.
But a little an interesting piece of trivia I thought at the time was that when I jumped through the window or whatever to go into the place, you ever jump through a window or something? There's a cook who says you can't come in here. That cook was the guy who wrote Rebel Without a Cause. He was a writer. And I learned that between takes that he had written Rebel Without a Cause. And he was Tom's mentor. Okay. Stuart Wood? No. Something. Anyway.
Somebody look it up on the phone.
Now, Jonathan, there's a story out there that when you were filming your melting scene, that you weren't able to actually go and make up off on set, and you actually had to go home and clean up that way. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is there truth to that? And
Well,
they
they did a lot on set, but then there was a point where, you couldn't actually tear the flesh off my face to my skull. So they shot a plate, and then like months later, they called me up and said, yeah, you gotta come down to Santa Monica warehouse there, and you stand in front of a green screen, and they put these tubes through you, and this green goop and this blood that's taro syrup or something, I don't know what it is, but it's very sticky and horrible. And it was the most excruciating day. You cut with the stuff and you can't clean it up. So after about 3 hours, that's a wrap. And I said, okay, so we just go shower. And they go, oh yeah, our shower's broken. So I have to drive home like this? Yeah, okay, so I get in my car, I'm driving home, I'm like, look at the gas thing. It's like, oh my God, I'm driving to Santa Monica Freeway. I have to go get gas. So I go to the gas station, and I think I'm not going to do self-service. So there was a guy there, and he comes out, and I'm like, yeah, fill it up. And he looks down like this, and he goes, like that, and he fills it up. But then as I take off, I see him run to this thing and get on the phone. I think he's calling cops or something.
That reminds me of once I was back in California working on another picture. And I was in this house that I'd rented because I had small kids and we were spending some time there. And a cable guy came to the house. And this is post-Fright Night, right? And the cable guy came to the house and he had to do extensive work because I called the landlord, there's something wrong with the cable. And the guy comes and literally spent like 5 hours there. He's working in the house, very silent, never said a word. And at the end of the day, I have to sign the receipt. And he comes up and he hands me this clipboard with the receipt on it, and I'm signing it, and I go to hand it back to him, and it's the first time he looked at me. And he looked up and he went, I'm surprised you come out in the daytime.
Now, Chris, at one point it was said that your voice was actually, they're going to use electronic enhancements on your voice, but then ultimately they decided not to go that way. Can you talk a little bit about why they ended up deciding to go ahead and keep your own actual voice, which was actually much more
That was
effective?
my voice? No. In what part of the movie?
I think when in your transformation.
Oh, I have no idea. I have no memory of any of this.
Yeah,
30 years.
Oh, yeah. All right, and so now we're going to shift to the big finale of the movie. How much time was spent on that big battle compared to the rest of the movie?
Well, it starts with the final transformation and reveal, that shot that needed to be that long. And then it goes to you, because part of the set was destroyed, so there was no going back, right? And I don't recall. I do recall getting hit in the head, and I had to do enough of. I did have a stunt woman, but when I originally lunged for Charlie, and there's chairs and things because there's all sorts of stuff, and kind of clawing and breaking my way through. And I do remember something fell, but you just keep going. And then she stepped in. I think it was only about a day for that portion of in the basement. And then did we shoot? Well, it was a different day where it was the end, or did we shoot the end moment where I rise up? Was that I'm not a vampire anymore? That was a different day.
I think it took longer than you think it did. I think it took longer because I remember being in that makeup for almost 2 weeks.
Okay, 30 years.
Your part of the day.
It's my mantra.
Okay, so the movie's released. Can we talk a little bit about seeing it on the big screen for your first time and your first reaction to seeing the final product?
We went to, who was it? You, me. Went to Hollywood Boulevard to a theater that it was not a fantastic theater on Hollywood Boulevard that had opened, the Egyptian. Is it just done?
Didn't we go out to dinner or something before?
Was that the original screening? Was it the... Pick up your money.
Okay, was that in Westwood?
The original screening wasn't at the motion picture place?
Was that where it was?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, but then we went and saw it with an audience.
Yeah.
And that was a
I
different
remember seeing it
experience.
with an
Okay,
audience
that was a
in Hawaii.
completely different experience. Because when you're with all industry people,
Civilian audience.
they're jaded and cynical, but it was still very well received. And of course it's incredibly exciting just to see what he built and to just sort of revel in the dream that you got to participate in this, and it was amazing.
And my recollection is the first time I saw it there, and then I also saw it in New York, in a theater on Times Square.
That's where I saw it.
And the audience went nuts. I mean, just went absolutely bonkers, screaming, yelling, throwing things.
My grandmother grew up in Appalachia, and she didn't know what a vampire was. So after she saw the movie, I had to explain the whole, from the beginning of time, what a vampire was. The light, the mirror thing, and everything. She was confused by it.
I remember I saw it in Times Square too for the first time. I didn't see it in the Academy, but there was, I remember when I had fallen down the stairs and then I wake up and back there, he and Roddy are there, and I sit up and back, so he goes, "Look out, Billy Cole's behind you!"
So about 2 years pass, and Fright Night 2 comes out, and only William and also Roddy returned. I'm just curious if Chris or Amanda or Steven, if there was any point, there were any real talks about you coming back for Fright Night Part 2.
I actually had to go and talk to her to get out of doing it. I wanted to do it, but I had been offered 976 Evil, which started filming basically right at the same time. So I had to make a choice, and and I did the movie with Remake instead. But it would have been great to have done it again. But yeah, it's kind of sitting on my butt for like 6 months, and then the phone rings and I get 2 things at the same time, which kind of sucked. But
Yeah, that's a huge drag.
There was as I recall, another, not the one that made it to screen. And we had a reading of that. And I was in that version. Okay, I'm 30 years. No. Well, maybe it didn't come to fruition that way, but there was another draft that I was in. And Tom was not involved. And so that kind of was a brush stroke over the project, but I loved the character, I loved working with these guys, and it was, you know, it was something I would be very much, and it was very early in my career, and I was very excited to possibly do it again. And then by the time the other draft came around, I was not included in that. It was a different storyline, and Amy wasn't there, and I was doing Married with Children, so I'm not sure that it would have worked out anyway. But I would have loved to.
I didn't know anything about it. I got the call that they wanted to do a sequel and read the script and thought, okay, well, everything has changed now. And I never had any idea until we started doing reunions, and Tom shows up and sort of gave some of the backstory about, you know, I think they wanted to have Jerry come back and they wanted to have the same cast, but you know, I don't know what the decisions were. I think that they were, that they wanted to do it on a shoestring budget, and that was not something that was going to work.
They didn't even call me. I didn't do the effects.
Now, William, can you talk a little bit about the differences between the directing style of Tom Holland and Tommy Lee Wallace?
Yes. It's kind of what I alluded to earlier, that Tom Holland was very engaged and very passionate and meticulous in a way, and Tom Wallace was who was, you know, very adept, was just kind of more into the craft of being a director and putting it, you know, into his vision, which didn't always include the actors. But he was a good director. It was just, I think that he felt like that the characters were not the thing that needed to be dealt with on a daily basis. He was more about putting it all together as in a film. So it wasn't quite as intimate.
And of course, part two ended up kind of just being sort of dumped into about 100 or so theaters when it came out, and in large part due to the head of the studio of Caracol Pictures, Jose Menendez, being killed by his sons, Lyle and Eric. But that, besides taking and causing the release to not get the widest possible release at that time, it also affected a possible third movie, correct?
To the extent I think that the second movie wasn't as successful, yeah, I think so.
Are you saying Bill Ragsdale was involved in the whole?
I have spoken about this on the record, and my lawyer has addressed it a number of times. I had nothing to do with it.
There's a dateline coming out soon about the case. And Bill's going to have to answer a lot of hard questions.
Yeah.
Lester
It's
Holt.
a trial.
So in a second here, I'm going to open up the audience for a couple questions here in a second, but I do want to go ahead and get some of your thoughts about the 2011 remake. Now I know, Chris, you actually appeared in a cameo.
That's part of the movie, that's part of the movie for me.
Now, Colin Farrell was actually, can you talk about interacting with Colin Farrell and your first meeting with him on that set?
The first time I met Colin Farrell, I was sitting in the trailer, and there was a knock on the door, and the door opened, and very sheepish, Colin Farrell walked in with a bag full of stuff, and he goes, I'm really nervous. And I said, hi. And he said, I watched this movie 50 times when I was in my teens. He said, this is one of my favorite all-time movies. And he said, I'm so nervous about doing it justice. And I thought that was just, you know, so ingenuous and sweet of him. And then he proceeded to give me a bottle of, like, priceless wine and a box set of the Carl Dreyer Vampire and a couple of other gifts, and just couldn't have been, I mean, you know, it was like just over the moon. I was there, and how thrilled he was, and on the set sat and wanted to talk about the movie and the character. And his sister was there because she works for him, and they watched it together when they were kids. I mean, he was a real major fan of the movie and couldn't have been nicer. And actually, the whole cast, they were great.
Anyone else's thoughts on what you?
Well, I thought as a standalone horror movie, it was very well done. I'm a huge fan of Colin Farrell and Toni Collette, and again, it was different. It was just a different thing. It, to me, didn't really have a lot of relationship to the original, with the exception of Chris, and that was just a totally great scene. But again, it had a sort of a one-note real darkness to it. And part of what made, I think, Fright Night so wonderful is the humanity and humor and just the different turns and the path that the story took. It was a different way of storytelling than the remake.
I agree with all that, but the thing I thought it was good. I just think missed the humor and what Amanda was saying, but the Peter Vincent character to me, I never felt for. I never had a relationship for, because I felt Roddy made you so on his side and so cheering for him. And although the performances were terrific, it just didn't come through. And that's what you want in a movie. You want to be cheering for the characters.
I felt the same way about Evil Ed. I thought that, with Steven's version, there's this empathy that we just sort of engage with naturally. And the sequel cover of the remake, I was just like, I don't care if this guy lives or not.
And the effects side.
So I'm going to go ahead and open for a couple audience questions.
One of the things that's been written about a lot about the film, especially in academic writing, is that the film has a pretty powerful gay subtext. I was wondering if you were aware of that when you were making the film.
Has a pretty powerful what?
Gay subtext. Were you aware of that and playing into that, or is that something that just came to light after the film was done?
I think it was pretty clear. Gay in the sense that Jerry's hold over Ed, for instance, there's a homoerotic, certainly, element to it. I don't think we necessarily look at Jerry as being a gay character, but somebody who was perfectly willing to use his sexual wiles on anybody.
I was not aware of that. Especially when Tom had me kneeling down in front of Chris. Until much later, and I was like, what? So that's what you wanted, okay.
Well, this goes back to the original thing where we were all doing biographies of the characters, and I started researching bats. I thought, well, somewhere in his genetic makeup, there are bats, right? And I saw in the research that there are very few vampire bat species in the world. They're almost all fruit bats. So that, well, what if there was a strain in his DNA, his vampire DNA, of fruit bat, and then he craves fruit, and that's where that came from. Yeah. Well, not all me, because I gave the idea to Tom, and he said, "Oh, let's use it. I love it," and so we sprinkled it throughout the movie. Yeah.
Hey guys, I'm a big fan. I've watched Chris since I was like 5-year-old, maybe a little bit. But I have a question. With Chris and Amanda and your characters in the movie, what was the past relationship with the person you knew a long time ago?
I have to take credit for something else too. This was just an idea that I had that I brought to Tom, which was, what if somewhere down the line, Jerry had a love that looked very much like, in centuries past, that looked very much like Amy, and he loved that, and so he had the picture drawn of her, and we added that. But again, to Tom's credit, he was very collaborative with all of us about ideas we had for the character, for the plot, as long as it didn't necessarily interfere with the basic through line of the movie. He was very happy to use it and did.
I had no cognitive awareness. You know, I'm that generation and only. So, but it helped enliven the intensity and the purpose behind him choosing me, because you saw he had other women that he drank from. So, yeah.
Yes, but yours was the only one he had a portrait of. As far as with that big oil.
Right, no, I mean, it was that, what Chris just spoke to, it was that story, backstory that he brought to.
You were never going to kill her. You wanted her to be your mate, right?
Yeah, I was going to take her with me 3 times.
What happens to the who's going to do that, right?
I was going to be the third wheel here.
And I think we have time
Not if I
for,
had anything to say about it.
I think we have time for one more. We'll go right back there if you're cool.
All right, Jonathan, I have seen this movie so many times over the years, and of course, every time you watch a movie, sometimes you'll see different things. Oh, I didn't see that the last million times I've seen this. And maybe other people figured it out, and I still haven't, but what were you? I mean, it's like you have the fingers, like...
I'm going to give everybody Tom's email, and you can just ask her honestly. I mean, I was talking about somebody, about this with somebody just today, and Chris and I did a lot of work together on kind of relationship and how long we've known each other and everything.